Tom's Patty about Cincinnati. What a team, what a team, what a team. Each man and lady from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.
Hello, Reds fans, and welcome to a special edition of We Love Our Team. You know, we normally don't timestamp these episodes, but we felt it was appropriate to devote an episode to the passing of Pete Rose, the all-time hit king in Major League Baseball and Cincinnati, a Major League Baseball legend. And so Jack and I just thought we would sit here and talk for 35, 45 minutes and reminisce about our memories of Pete Rose. And so, Jack, I guess we usually introduce a guest, so I'll just say, hey,
here's my guest. So
here's my co-host, Jack Greiner.
Glad to be here. I appreciate the warm applause. We're going to talk today about Pete on the field. We had Keith O'Brien on sometime back, a few weeks back, a month back, and we talked a little bit about some of the off-field stuff. And it's out there, and it can't be ignored. But we're not gonna go there today. We're gonna talk about Pete's on the field persona and performance. And there's so much to talk about. We could go on for hours, which we won't do, but Randy, you put up on Twitter, I thought something really interesting, a top 10 of sort of the Pete moments. And starting with number 10, you had the All-Star game, the winning run in 1970, which, it's interesting because I was having lunch today with a friend of mine who grew up in Cleveland, and that's the sum and substance of Pete Rose for them. It's like what he did to Ray Fosse, and what a cheap shot that was. And of course, we're here. Hey, that's hustle, man. That's just that's Pete scoring the winning run. That's just all there is to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where you were, Jack. I was in Finneytown at the time. I guess I was 13 years old, and my mom and dad went to the All-Star game that year. Riverfront Stadium had just opened up. They opened up. I think they hurried to get it open for the All-Star game. So that was in July of 1970.
Well, the stadium opened. Riverfront's first game was June 30th, and the All-Star game was I think less than maybe July 13th. It was just about 2 weeks after. Yeah.
Something like that. And if it was a normal baseball game, everybody would have been going crazy. But I guess the controversy erupted because the All-Star game is an exhibition game, or what is it? And Pete crashes in the home plate like he would normally. This was before the Buster Posey rule.
Yep.
It was a totally legitimate play. And, I've often wondered whether he would have done that in another stadium. I mean, he had 50,000 people going crazy.
Oh, he would. I think he would have.
Third.
He would have done that at the Cheviot Fieldhouse. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, seriously, that was the winning run. He was, by God, going to score it. And I think I told the story on the podcast, so I won't belabor it. But I was there. My dad and I had actually started to leave the game.
I remember that.
Dick Dietz hit a home run in the ninth inning to tie it for the National League. So we had made our way from the red seats to the yellow seat section and slipped past a couple of ushers. And so we actually were in the yellow seats and saw that unfold live. And it's, the different perspective is pretty interesting that, those of us from Cincinnati and the Big Red Machine fans, we loved every minute of it, and the Cleveland. And I will say this, and I think, I think Fosse definitely was injured, but and Pete has downplayed it a little bit on the HBO documentary. I mean, he was injured, but I do think that a part of that was the same reason guys like Wayne Simpson flamed out and that sort of thing. It's just they got rushed back to play, and the medical care was inadequate at that time, and I think that had more to do with Fosse's career not being maybe what people thought it was going to be, but he had a decent career. I mean, I think he played for, another 10 years or so, I think.
Yeah, there's kind of a myth out there that injury ruined Ray Fosse's career, and it maybe it impacted his career, but he had a good career after that. There's no question about that. Pete loves to talk about Fosse, liked him. They went out to dinner, I believe, either the night before the All-Star game, and he says he got along with Fosse. I saw an ESPN Sports Center thing the other night after Pete's passing, and I think it was Tim Kirkjian who said that Fosse was mad at Pete after that. So that contradicts what Pete says. But he had a good career. And I think that
I just looked it up on MLB Reference. I mean, he played through 1979. So, I mean, and he had come up in 67. So, I mean, a 12-year big league career is pretty good. And he was an All-Star again in 71. He was an All-Star and won the Gold Glove. So, I mean, it didn't take him out. He was back the next year. He was perfectly capable the next year. So, it's just kind of interesting. But it says it goes to Pete. I mean, I don't think that there were many other players. I doubt that. I don't know that anybody else in that lineup would have done it. And that's not to disparage Pete or elevate Pete. I think it was just Pete. I think it's also funny. I hadn't thought about it, but seeing a picture of Pete right after the collision, kind of, looking over to see what's up. And I don't know if it was Jim Hickman or who got the hit, or another player on the National League was hugging Pete, and over Pete's shoulder, running in from third base coaching box, is Leo DeRocher, who was then the manager of the Cubs. DeRocher might have done it. I mean, DeRocher might have crashed into the catcher. It's just kind of interesting that Leo was probably there, And I guess Leo gave him the go sign. I don't know if Pete ran through a stop. Do you know? I don't remember.
I think he gave him the go sign, and I think that play just epitomizes his career, right? It was total hustle. And as we've talked off the record, we need to get T-shirts printed up, Jack, and I think we'll do it. And we were talking about saying "rest in peace, Pete," and I think we've landed on the appropriate verbiage for that T-shirt. I think it's "Hustle and Pete."
Hustle and peace. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that is, Pete doesn't rest. I mean, Pete doesn't rest. He wouldn't be peaceful if he were resting. Your next one was 10 seasons of 200 plus hits, which, again, I was talking to my daughter the other night at dinner, and I said something like, nobody will ever break Pete's record. And she goes, you don't think so? I go, Katie, I mean, that's 20 seasons of 200 hits. I mean, it's just not going to happen. I mean, obviously the record we talked about a few weeks ago with Chris Welsh thrown over to first 21 times is not going to be broken because of the rule change. But I feel pretty confident that in saying that we are not, in my lifetime's a little shorter than my kid's lifetime, but we're not going to see that record be broken. I think the DiMaggio 57 game hitting streak is more vulnerable than Pete's record. I mean, I just can't. It is, like I play the Immaculate Grid every day, and periodically there'll be a, one of the categories will be, 200 hits in a season, and it's tough to find guys who do it. Even batting champions don't necessarily get 200 hits in a season, and to do it 20, not that Pete did it 20 seasons in a row, but I mean to do it, but to get 4,000 hits is, you got to have 200 hits for 20 years, and it's just not going to happen. There's no way.
It's not going to happen. 4192, and I like to say 4256 because that's the new record, obviously. And Jack, I think that's kind of a fascinating story because we followed Pete, before 4192. The younger audience won't appreciate this. We didn't have Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. USA Today literally had the countdown to 4192, like in the upper corner of the front page of the USA Today, and they would have a story on it every day how close he was getting the 4192.
Yeah.
And I went to Chicago the weekend before because he had 4189 going into Chicago. And we stayed there for 2 days, Friday and Saturday, hoping he would break the record up in Chicago, I guess, unlike Marge Schott. But we were there just in case. And then Sunday morning, we wake up. We were all ready to go home because Pete was not going to be in the starting lineup because he was platooning at the time with Tony Perez at first base. And then so the Cubs were going to throw a left-handed pitcher. And of all things, the left-handed pitcher got injured in a bicycle accident.
That's right.
That morning. A bicycle accident.
Yeah. And,
so we go to Wrigley Field, and all of a sudden they announced Pete. Well, we knew Pete was going to play because of the bicycle accident. We get to Wrigley Field in the first inning, and there's maybe 10,000 people in the crowd. And by the fourth or fifth inning, that place was packed.
Yeah.
Because he got 4191.
Right.
And he still had another bat or two, and there was a long rain delay.
Right.
And they came out, and we stuck through it because we had to be there if it was 4192. And he hit an absolute shot, the shortstop, that would have been 4192, and the guy goes up and makes a great catch. I have other friends from Western Hills. My buddies Bill O'Connor and Terry Finley, and I think Dan Murphy was on that trip, probably Joe Chartolo. They actually left Sunday morning.
Oh, no.
So they were listening in their cars getting back to Western Hills.
Oh, geez.
And I guess they were the smart ones because we got back about midnight, and he still didn't break the record.
You were the smart one.
And then we came home, and of course, I don't know, the first night he came home, he went 0 for 4, hitless, packed crowd. The next night, standing room only again, and we got to see it that night. And I forget, Jack, were you at the 4192 game, September 11th, 1985?
September 11th. I was not. I was at my house. Our daughter, Katie, was not quite 2. We had, I believe, my in-laws over, crowded around a not very big TV. And I think Katie, at one point, as Pete was coming up, was disappointed that people weren't paying attention to her. So she turned the TV off, and we jumped up, didn't have remote control, and grabbed that knob and turned it back on. And so we were able to see it, but it was that close. It was that close.
Well, it's like the USA Today story, how they followed along every day. I don't think people appreciate today. That game was nationally televised on NBC. You think of another record in sports today, some quarterback having the all-time passing lead. Now, the NFL is a little different because all their games on national TV.
Right.
But can you imagine the NBA? They're not going to have a national broadcast because some guy's approaching a record.
Well, so getting back to your list, so we had the 10 season 200 plus. Now, number 8 on your original list was the All-Star game again. So we'll take that one off. But I think you and I were talking offline a little bit. There's two. We talked about 2, and I'll add maybe a potential third, which is the Dave Pallone incident in '88, I think, when he got suspended and got in Pallone's face, and that was pretty awesome. And what made that even a little bit more awesome was Marty and Joe's reaction in the booth. I mean, the fact that they got summoned to meet with Giamatti based on their call of that was just incredible to me. I mean, but and Nuxall was about ready to come out of the booth, which was great. And then, of course, we had the '73 playoffs when Pete got in the fight with Bud Harrelson, which is, again, another instance, I think, where, before Pete got into his off-the-field troubles. So I go to law school at Notre Dame in, 1980. And by this point, Pete's a Philly. But I remember just talking to people and getting these really strong negative reactions about Pete. And it was sort of like, I think, a little naivete on my part. It was like, well, what's your problem? I mean, it's Pete. Yeah, and they're like, well, he crashed into Ray Fosse or he beat up Bud Harrelson or, I mean, it's like, oh, yeah, he did. But, I mean, come on.
Yeah, the fight with Harrelson was so great because that was in the 73 playoffs. And I forget which game it was, but it was in New York. They ended up throwing out beer bottles at Pete. I think he was playing left field.
Yeah.
And in the same game, I believe, I still had that poster in my bedroom back in Finneytown, 1973, because I believe it's the same game. Maybe it was the next game because the New York fans really hated Pete because of the fight with Harrelson and for a lot of other reasons, obviously. But Pete hit a home run.
So I think the fight was game 4. They threw all kinds of stuff at him in left field to the point where I think Sparky said, I'm taking the team off the field.
Yep.
Seaver and Yogi Berra, who was the manager, went out and just told the fans, come on, knock it off. And they did ultimately, and they finished game 4. The Reds lost, so they come back in game 5, and Pete hits a home run and just pumps his fist.
And he was pumping his fist coming around third base. That was a great poster. So to the Dave Pallone incident, I don't know where you were, Jack, but Sue and I, my wife Sue and I, were sitting in the backyard of our home in Fort Thomas, and I think that was like the 8th inning. And we're listening to Marty and Joe.
Oh.
And that was one of the great games to listen to of all time. I mean, Marty and Joe are going crazy. Pallone missed the call. It was a big call. The Reds were good back. Pete managed.
The Reds were contending, yeah.
Every year they finished second under Pete, and they had been terrible from 82 to 84. And then Pete came back.
Yeah.
And they finished. They were competitive every year. And he left Lou Piniella a pretty good team.
He did.
But, there's a few moments in life where you remember where you were when something happened. And I distinctly remember me and Sue sitting up there and just laughing our asses off.
I was at my father-in-law's house in Milford and had the same reaction. And it was like, oh my God, because I was listening, so I didn't see how close, how he blew the call. But I feel like since then I've seen the video and he completely blew the call. I mean, it
completely blew the call.
It wasn't even close. And I think I had heard a story that, again, this is back in the late 80s. So fortunately we've evolved and we don't have the kind of homophobia that we probably had. But I think that this was before Pallone came out as gay, but I think a lot of the players knew or suspected. And somebody told me that Pallone was a little defensive about it. And I don't know if this is a true story or not, but he kicked Concepcion out of the game. Concepcion was sitting in the dugout eating sunflower seeds, and Pallone thought he was blowing kisses, and he threw him out of the game. I mean, that's what things were like back then. So I think Pallone had some issues. Okay, number 3 possible addition, which I don't think you had in your list, was back-to-back hitting titles in 68 and 69, because I think that started to move Pete into sort of the national spotlight. We in Cincinnati knew about Pete and how, but I think to win back-to-back, and I think it was the 68 season he came in. It was one of those things where it was he and Matty Alou going toe-to-toe, and I think Pete played, on the last day of the season, could have sat out and didn't, and got hits and, legitimately won the batting title, and then turned around and won it in 69. So I think that's tough to do, to win a batting title back-to-back. I don't think any other Red ever did it.
Well, Jack, you've often said on the podcast that, boys kind of become of age with baseball.
Yeah.
Become really big fans when they're around 12 years old, right?
Yep.
So I was 11 in 68, 12 in 69, and now this guy's winning batting titles back-to-back.
Right.
So that cemented my love for Pete Rose. No question about it.
Did you emulate his batting style?
Well, Jack, that's a complicated story. I think I did and I think I batted about 160 that season. And so the next season I came out and I disregarded it. I probably batted 140. So I probably should have gone back to his hitting style because, you know, my athletic ability kind of peaked in sixth grade, Jack. And
Well,
Dean Backscheider threw a nasty curveball to me in B minor, my first at-bat of the season. I was done.
so here's a picture of me when I was probably 7 years old at the Cheviot Fieldhouse, and I it's hard to see, but I clearly did not emulate Pete's style. I don't know who I was standing like.
I think it's Tony Perez.
Maybe
Your
it was
favorite
Tony,
player.
but I'll tell you. Speaking of Tony, the guy who absolutely copied Pete's stance was our friend Tony Hobson. When he played softball for our Frost and Jacobs team back, I mean, he would get in the crouch, and I mean, it was great. I mean, it was just so funny. It was perfect.
Tony Hobson loved Pete.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a story about batting 185. I don't know if you saw this, but Pete was interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, "Hey, Pete, the pitching seems to be better these days. How do you think you would hit against these guys? What would be your batting average?" And Pete's response was 185. And the guy goes, "Are you kidding me? Are the pitchers that good?" And Pete said, "Hell no, I'm 83 years old."
Right. That's a great line. That's
classic Pete.
Line. So
classic
we got that.
Pete.
We'll jump up to the next one on your list, which is the 1975 World Series. You know, what gets lost, I think, in that is that he was the MVP of that series. People think about the Fisk home run, and people from Boston think it was a 6-game series. Bench has a great line that, the Red Sox won that series 3-4. And you kind of remember that it was Morgan that had the hit that drove in the winner. But Pete, I don't have his numbers handy on. Well, maybe I do. But he had a tremendous.
He had a series.
Let's just.
Hey, Jack,
so 75.
I'll help you out on that. He had 10 hits.
Yep.
And, game 7, it was tied 3-3. Griffey got on base. I think he singled. And then they basically pitched around Pete because Pete drew a walk.
Okay.
Which put it first and second. I don't know if it was 1 out or 2 out. And Joe hit that blooper in the center field that scored Griffey to make the game 4-3, and they won the series, obviously.
Pete hit in the 75 World Series. Pete hit 370, on base percentage of 485, slugging 481. So he had an OPS of 966. In the NLCS, he hit 357 with a 357 on base percentage. So he didn't walk at all. He had 357, slugged 571 for an OPS of 929, and the 76 NLCS. 429 batting average, 467 on base, 714 slugging with a 1.181 OPS, which are just off the chart numbers, and that's at the highest level and pressure. He obviously came through. I remember game 1 of the 73 NLCS. It was uncharacteristic for Pete to hit home runs, but he hit one. He either hit the winning home run in game 1 off of Seaver. I think Bench hit one to tie it. I think the Reds won 2-1. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure the Reds won 2-1, and Pete, took Seaver deep to win it. So this was not a guy who shrunk in the big moments. And I remember game 7 of the 72 series, he made the last out, but he hit a ball to the warning track. As I recall, we had seats up in the red seat. We were there sitting high in the red seats, and we couldn't see what happened. We just saw the ball kind of come off the bat, and it was,
Yeah.
And then we heard sort of the groan that, Gene Tennis or whoever caught it. But
I think it was Joe Rudy, and I think the 1975 stats are so significant. Really, when you think of the pressure that was on the Reds, they had
Yeah.
lost. They were the big red machine. They lost in 70 to the Orioles. They lost in 72 to the A's. They lost to the Mets in 73. They're coming in the 1975. They got the lead going into Game 6. They lose Game 6 on the Fisk home run. And so there was an enormous amount of pressure on the Reds in Game 7, more so on the Red Sox. And, Pete went 2 for 4 in that game and then drew that walk.
Yep.
So that was pretty impressive under pressure.
No, there's
obviously.
I think it's called The Machine. I think Joe Posnanski wrote it. And he talks about how Sparky was convinced that if they didn't win the 75 series, he was going to get fired. I mean, he just, was that convinced.
I think there's no question.
And the Reds were going to be, they were at risk of being like the Buffalo Bills, always close, but not quite there. Rookie of the Year in 63. I think that's a great call. Number 6. Pete's the stuff, on the field, it just is so interesting. He Hutchinson liked him, put him in the lineup over Don Blasingame, who was a very popular veteran. The veterans didn't like Pete. They didn't like the Charlie Hustle nickname came from Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford. It was not a compliment. And really, I guess the guys that Pete gravitated to were Vada Pinson and Frank Robinson because they were actually nice to him. And then at one point, apparently, Reds management came to him and said, "You got to stop hanging around with the black guys." I mean, it's a really interesting story. And you can see where, it probably helped drive Pete a little bit. But, the idea, it was different back then. I don't think, it was not considered real good etiquette for a rookie to come in and replace somebody. But, it was obviously the right move. It was also a nice run in the 60s. And I guess when you look back at the Reds in the 60s, you can definitely see the building blocks. I mean, how many rookies of the year did they have? They had Rose and Helms and Bench. And
Perez.
then you had, I don't know if Bernie Carbo, I think Bernie Carbo came in second to Steve Rogers of the Expos. But, you had Carbo and McRae that were terrific. Wayne Simpson in 1970. So you could really see the player development that the Reds had going for them. It was pretty amazing.
They fired Dave Bristol after the 1969 season. You wonder, Dave coached most of those guys in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
And they love to tell the stories of Dave Bristol driving the station wagon down in Georgia someplace, and there's Perez and all the way back in the hatchback area, kind of crumpled
way back,
up.
as my kids call it.
They're traveling by car, and they fire Bristol in 69. You just wonder if he could have been Sparky Anderson had they not fired him because, let's face it, Sparky
I
had
guess
some
they
pretty
decided
good.
they needed change. So
yeah,
maybe a change is good. So he had 73 NL MVP. Again, how about the run of MVPs for the Reds in the 70s? You had Bench in 70 and 72. You had Pete in 73, Morgan in 75 and 76, right? And then Foster in 77.
Yeah, no question about it.
I mean, that's just unbelievable. And I had a guy that I used to work with from Pittsburgh was saying the Reds were, the Pirates were just as good as the Reds. And I'm sort of like, really? I mean, 70, 72, 75. Come on. I mean, if you want to be the best, you gotta actually win. And then he was giving me a hard time about Pete Rose winning the MVP. And I'm like, Pete, the thing is, Pete in 73 did exactly what his job was, which was to get on base ahead of guys like Morgan and Bench and Perez. And that was the job at hand. He had 230 hits in 73. He scored 115 runs. and he hit 338. He won the batting title. So, to even suggest that he wasn't a worthy recipient, I think is just absurd. And that's just Pittsburgh people are stupid. That's just
Well, my neighbor, Dave Franco, he's from Oakland, and he likes to argue about whether or not the Big Red Machine was the team of the 70s. Oakland won the World Series.
Yeah, I mean, I
72, 73, and
that
74.
argument. I will not grant the Pittsburgh Pirate argument, but I will definitely, yeah. I mean, you had, they win 3 world championships. They were in the ALCS in '75, and then Finley kind of gutted the team. So yeah, I don't know if I concede that point, but I'll give you that point. But don't come at me with the Pirates. I'm sorry. I mean, just don't.
I don't even think Curtis Fuller would go there. We need to have Curtis Fuller on a.
I was thinking about Curtis. Jack. Well, I don't know. We'll drop this before we drop the Curtis episode. But Curtis was great and a big Pirates fan. But remember, Randy, one of the things Curtis said, and this was on Friday before Pete's death on Monday. Curtis said he really felt Pete should get in the Hall of Fame before he dies. That's really kind of stuck in my head a little bit. So that time ran out, I guess, on Pete, which is sad. I mean, you can't help but be sad for that. 17 All-Star selections at 5 different positions. Pete was not certainly renowned for his fielding prowess, but he did win 2 Gold Gloves as an outfielder. He just he played where he needed to play, and when it came time to move to third, I mean, he could have said no. Sparky asked, and there have been other athletes who have sort of declined. And tough position, man, the hot corner, and by God, Pete just went and did it. So you really have to give him a lot of credit. And I think I feel like I remember a story from Marty Brennaman. Marty was doing that, obviously was broadcasting that game, and I think the first guy up hit a ground ball to third.
Yes, he did.
And Pete fielded it and threw over, and we all kind of collectively let go a sigh of relief, I think, because it was.
That's one of Marty's great calls.
Yeah,
I think, because there was so much worry about him moving to third base.
Right.
And as much as he was an individual player, he was always worried about his individual stats. Obviously, I mean, he was chasing Ty Cobb probably in 1963. He probably had that on his mind. He was always chasing the records. He's played in the most games. He's had the most wins, all of that stuff. But it's the ultimate team player, I think, to switch those positions, second base, the right field, the left field, the third base, the first base.
Yeah.
I mean, he wanted to win.
He wanted to win.
Yeah. So we can criticize him for being too focused on individual accomplishments, but I really don't think you can argue that he was kind of the ultimate team player.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's right. Now you had, another tweak I would make to your list. You've got number 3, return to Cincinnati in 1984. I'd move that up to number 2, but we'll talk about what you have at number 2. But return to Cincinnati. I mean, I've told this story how you were on vacation, I think, when they announced it, and I was on vacation. No, I was on vacation.
You were on vacation.
I told my wife, I've got to call Randy. I mean, I got to talk to Randy about this because he's going to be so happy. And you were. I mean, I've had, 4 kids, and I'm married, and I can't honestly say that the day of my wedding, the day of the birth of my 4 kids, that I was any happier than you were on the day that Pete came back to Cincinnati.
Oh, I remember distinctly. It's another story with my wife. I pulled in the driveway after work one day, and I don't know if I had just heard it on the radio or if she came running out the front door to tell me. And I think it had to be one of the happier moments in my life because I was just hoping for it for so long. And then, Jack, I think his return to Cincinnati that night when they're playing the Phillies. And it's a full house, standing room only. We had about 30 guys go down there. Maybe the wives came. I think they did. And, Pete comes up, and he penciled himself in at leadoff spot. I think playing first base. And he just hits a rope to center field. It gets past the center fielder, and he goes head first in the third base. That place exploded.
Cubs, it was the Cubs, and it was Bob Dernier was the center fielder. I remember it.
Oh, you're right. It was Dernier.
Yeah,
I always kind of wondered.
Bob Dernier, and there's Pete, head first. I mean, like, you just can't. I mean, there's been some moments in Cincinnati Reds history that if you wrote it and made a movie out of it, people would say that's just over the top. And I think that. I mean, like, he comes back and like you say, full house, and he gets the triple, and he does the head first slide. I mean, I think Johnny Bench hitting a home run on Johnny Bench night,
Yep.
Is up there. Bench's 72 home run. It's just it's like you can't even believe. Like I said, if you wrote it in a script, people would say it's just not believable. Now here's where I think
that was Jack. I just want to comment for a second. I think that maybe when he got 4-1-9-2, there was a longer ovation, but I don't think that it was louder. I think the loudest ovation I've ever heard was that night in 1980. Let's get these years right.
84.
84, because it was so unexpected. 4-1-9-2.
Yeah.
Everybody knew it was going to happen eventually.
So I'm going to see, I would bump that to 2, and I would take the 44-game hitting streak, great as it was, and I'd move that down to 3, because I just think like you say, the excitement of that night was you just can't beat it. But the 44-game streak, again, classic Pete, just in the midst of, again, we're not talking about off the field stuff, but in the midst of a nasty divorce, he's just going out there every night, and getting the hits, and competitive to the very end. And it was just, I love the quote. Pete was upset that the streak ended, and Gene Garber was the last pitcher that got him, that got the out, and Pete said something, like, Garber's pitching like it's the 7th game of the World Series. And Garber had a nice comeback. He said, well, he's up there hitting like it's the 7th game of the World Series. So
that's
what
right.
You want, I thought that was a great exchange. But Pete has always said if he went up with a rolled up newspaper, he would have walked on 4 pitches. That Garber didn't throw him really a strike, but I don't know. But, that was an amazing run, and it was really fun. And, we got to find out who Tommy Holmes was, and who was the other guy for Wee Willie Keeler was
the other guy. So, yeah, that was an amazing summer. I can remember just being with my buddies, and we just tuned into the transistor radio every night if it wasn't on TV, right? Or if they weren't at home. And everybody crowded around there just wondering if he's going to get a hit. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was drama, and I guess little did we know that it was going to be Pete's last season. It was going to be both Pete and Sparky's last season in Cincinnati, so kind of poignant there.
Well, Jack, now you mentioned that being his last season, I have to give a call out to my buddy Steve Iona, now a world-renowned doctor. So he and I, after the 1978 season, and Pete signed with Philadelphia, we vowed to go see him in his first game in a Philadelphia Phillies uniform.
Oh, nice.
So the opening night, 1979, was in St. Louis. And we left Dayton, Ohio at about 8 p.m. We got to Indianapolis. We stopped probably to get gas or something. And we left the gas station, and a guy sideswipes us.
Oh, no.
So we're thinking our trip might be in jeopardy. So we chased this guy, and unfortunately, we both went over a median we were chasing him, and we totaled our car. and this is now like midnight. The cops are there, and we probably had a few beers, but this is how times have changed. The cops, I think they cited the other guy for the hit and run. They drove us to a hotel, and before they got to the hotel, they stopped like at a donut shop to get some sustenance in us. And they told us where the bus station was because we told them what our mission was. So we took a Greyhound bus to St. Louis. We made it in time. We met Red Shandy's daughter that night. We sat with her kind of behind the Phillies dugout. We kind of snuck down to some seats. I don't know how we got our seats.
That's awesome.
We probably scalped them. And then we returned a couple days later, and my dad has never been so mad at me his entire life because we had him pick us up in Indianapolis with a totaled car. So anyway, that was the allegiance to Pete Rose, and Steve Iona stuck it out. He was quite the fan too.
That is awesome. Well, speaking of Pete and the Phillies, I got a little snarky on Twitter this week. I'll admit it, but J.D. Vance wrote this thing about how Pete was the spirit of Cincinnati, or it was the pride of Cincinnati and all this stuff. And he has a photo attached to his tweet of Pete in a Phillies uniform. So I retweeted that and maybe made a comment about JD, but I found that kind of hilarious. It was like it was disconcerting to see Pete in a Phillies uniform. I think it just I guess I got used to it. I never got used to him in an Expos uniform. That just looked bizarre to me. That was just weird. So it was good that he came back. Well, that's Randy, great list. One of the things that I've just been fascinated by is just some of Pete's numbers as a Red and how he stacks up. And there's just some interesting, I find really interesting. He's probably not surprisingly, he's the all-time WAR leader for position players with the Reds. He had a 78 WAR as a Red. The next closest was Bench at 75.1, and then Larkin was 70.5. So that speaks to his value WAR being wins above replacement. Interestingly, Pete's overall WAR was like 70. I can tell you, was 79.5. So he slipped a little. He had a couple of years, I think, where he had a negative WAR. But I was a little surprised when I started looking at it. I think I might have guessed Bench or Morgan would have had a higher WAR because it factors in defense, as well as offense. But Morgan, I was a little surprised. Morgan is 6 on the all-time Reds list for WAR, behind Pete, Bench, Larkin, Votto, and Frank Robinson. So, I found that kind of interesting. But again, it speaks to Pete's value. But and I think it speaks because there's weight given to power hitting. I mean, it's not a big surprise that Bench is up there. It's not a big surprise that Votto and Robinson are there. So for Pete to do it without really being a power hitter is pretty amazing. And again, that is just his time in Cincinnati. I found it a couple other just sort of interesting pieces. Pete is only 9th place on base percentage in the history of the Reds. I would never have guessed that. I mean, I just that sort of astounds me.
That doesn't make any sense.
Like he's behind Adam Dunn. Morgan's the all-time leader with a 415 on base percentage, and Votto at 409. Number 6, might be a little surprising. He's currently playing in the wild card playoffs right now. You want to take a quick guess?
I do want to take a quick guess, but I'm drawing a blank. Going through the teams really quickly.
Jesse Winker.
Jesse Winker is sixth on the
Six
all-time
in
OPS.
terms of his percentage on base percentage, but Pete's number 9, and I don't know if that's a factor of just playing a long time or what, because he's number 2 all time in base on balls.
Yeah, it does. It's got to be just his longevity and the number of bats he had.
I was really surprised. I mean, that just blew my mind. I mean, I would never, that's probably a good bar bet to make, to somebody, because I would think the average person would just assume that Pete is at least top 5 on base percentage.
Well, what's interesting is you said Joe Morgan has a higher OPS than Joey Votto, and how much Joey Votto was criticized for his OPS, walking too much and not swinging outside the strike zone. I think Pete probably went outside the strike zone a little bit more than Morgan and Votto. Obviously, he was a little bit more aggressive, trying to hit the ball.
But he's number 2 in walks. It's just really interesting. The other thing that I found, Pete is number 7 all time in the number of strikeouts, and there's to me, again, this is me being sort of a nerd, but it is. Do you want to take a quick guess at who number 1 is all time strikeout leader for the Reds? Might surprise you.
I think it's going to surprise me. I'm going to say somebody like Bench.
It's Votto.
It's Votto.
Yeah.
All-time strikeout leader.
But here's what I found interesting is Pete, is number 6 all time. He's got 900 he's 7 all time with 972 strikeouts as a Red. That's in 19 seasons with the Reds. Okay.
Yeah, that's longevity. So that's only 50 per year.
I don't have it anymore, but the number of plate appearances. Immediately behind Pete in the strikeout total, you won't guess it, but another third baseman. How about if I tell you another third baseman?
Well, I think the obvious one is Tony Perez, but that doesn't make any sense.
Perez is number 2 all time in strikeouts, but it's Gino Suarez. So I mean, as a Red, I mean, how many years? What did Suarez play? Like 4 or 5? Was he on the team? And he managed in that time to accumulate almost as many strikeouts as Pete did in 19 seasons.
19 seasons. Well, my Finneytown math tells me, Jack, Pete struck out 50 times a year on average, which is pretty low. That's one every.
It was a little bit different era back then, but Pete just didn't strike out much. I mean, I just don't think he had a good batting eye, and he wasn't up. I don't think he swung. I think he had good plate discipline. But I mean, Adam Dunn is number 4. Jay Bruce is number 5. So that tells you as much about sort of the era. I think is anything else, but
Pete was really good at fouling off pitches.
Yeah,
that were close with 2 strikes. He would intentionally foul the ball off to avoid a strikeout or have another swing at it.
And the other thing about it, again, this surprised me a little bit, only because of his longevity. But Pete is not in the top 10 in stolen bases. Again, it just. Not that he was a big base stealing threat, but he did hit, he hit leadoff, and just I would think with the amount of times he was on base, I would have thought just he would have accumulated enough stolen bases to be in the top 10, but I don't know where. I only have I only have 1 through 10. Bid McPhee's the all-time leader, Morgan's 2, but you don't find Pete in there. So it's just an interesting kind of player, and you know, in some respects, um, there was a period. Although I don't think you know, he played in there. Stolen bases got devalued, but that was more in like the 2000s and the 90s, where the statisticians said it's not worth it. You know, but certainly in the 60s and the 70s, and playing in the National League and on turf, that just kind of surprised me. I would have not again.
Yeah, he was not.
Morgan's number 2 all time. That doesn't surprise me, but Pete to not be in the top 10, just it did it. But I guess you know the strategy with the Reds was why you know.
Well, they didn't steal as much back in those days either.
Bench or Perez is going to hit you in anyway, so you know you as well stay put. You know, why get thrown out? But I found that really.
Well, you know the thing you said about his strikeouts, it reminded me of Pete's claim to fame, which is he played in more winning games than anybody else. You know, he played in more winning games than Joe DiMaggio played in.
Right, that's amazing.
He also he played in more losses than anybody else. You know.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, you know, he's most hits, and you know, he struck out, but not anywhere near in that ratio. But I mean, so he's the Reds franchise leader all time in WAR.
Hits.
He's he's 10th all time in career batting average. He's a 307 hitter for the Reds. Cy Seymour was the number 1 with 332. But yes, games played. Wait a minute.
Probably wins.
I mean, it's close with Concepcion. I mean, it's kind of close. Pete played in 2,722 games. Concepcion played in 2,488. So, but he's number 1 in WAR, at bats, plate appearances, runs scored, hits, total bases, doubles, singles, runs created, extra base hits.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. Times on base. This is interesting. I hadn't seen this. He's the all-time Reds leader in caught stealing. So maybe that goes to why he's not in the top 10 in stealing. Huh.
Yep.
Kind of interesting.
So, Jack, I got a couple questions for you.
You know, it's plastered on there. It's just kind of everywhere to be found. Yeah. So even you know, you don't think of him necessarily as an RBI guy, but he's number 5 all time in the Reds list for RBIs.
And that's tough batting in the leadoff position.
Yeah, it's tough batting. Yeah, right, exactly. So you know, just it's fun, Randy, and there'll never be another one like Pete. I think that for a whole host of reasons, and you know,
so Jack, I've got to ask you 2 questions.
Yeah.
Number 1, how did you learn of his passing, and how did you react?
How did I learn? I was sitting watching TV Monday night. I don't remember what we were watching. Kathy and I were watching. We binge watch a lot of things. It might have been The West Wing. We've been going back to The West Wing, and I just happened to look at my phone, and I got a text from my friend Louis Proietti, and it said R.I.P. Pete Rose, and that's all it said, and it was like, what? Wait a minute, Pete? And then I scrolled, and then I had a message from my sons, you know, who confirmed. And then I think I went to Twitter or somewhere. How about you?
I found out the playoff game had just ended, and they were interviewing Eduardo Perez.
Okay.
On the telecast, and he said he had just learned the news of Pete's passing and started to kind of tear up.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, he started tearing up. I started tearing up. My phone started blowing up. And then SportsCenter came on, and Tim Kirkjian did a fantastic – they must have had something in the can because they had all of his highlights together.
Yeah.
You know, and I wonder –
I think for famous people, they kind of have the bio, you know, the obit ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was quite a night, you know, and I'd like to think I grieved that night. And then the next morning I woke up. I had trouble sleeping that night. And I just said, the heck with this. let's celebrate his life. And we just reminisced about all the great memories. I tell people, I think a vast majority of my sports memories in my life revolve around Pete.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I think for people our age, he really was, I think, the first guy, first Red, that we, as we came of age. And again, so I was 63, I was 8. No, is that right? No, 63, I was 5. Excuse me. 63, I was 5. And, 64. And really, I think to the extent you've got memories at that age, it's nothing very detailed. But I would be willing to say that Pete was really the first Red that I was sort of consciously aware of, I think.
Yeah.
And I'll bet a lot of guys in Cincinnati my age, because Pete was on the scene before Bench, and really before Tony. And so I think a lot of guys my age, that is probably a shared experience. I think it was just kind of the first, like probably my grandson, and grandkids, I should say, they're going to be my age someday, and they'll be talking about Ellie De, their first guy is Ellie, Ellie De La Cruz.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
And that's not to suggest that Ellie's going to have the career that Pete had, but I do think he's made a splash and an impact. And just, years from now, when you say, hey, who's really the first Red you thought about, and that's kind of how I was. Yeah. So
even Murphy agrees with that. I think Murphy must be thinking Ellie's his favorite. All of a sudden he's barking, hey, Murph, come on down, settle down a little bit.
So
we're going to wind up this episode of the podcast.
What was your other question?
Well, do you agree with Bob Costas that they should now admit Pete Rose into the National Baseball Hall of Fame as an inductee?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I just, again, Pete ultimately kind of exhausted me, and I just, I'm being honest here, and they say that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And I am not going to have a problem if he gets admitted. I'm not going to lose sleep if he doesn't get admitted. And I guess part of me will be like, if they were going to, why wait till he dies? I mean, I think at a point it would have been like, enough's enough. He's the great, he's the all-time hits leader, and we're certainly not condoning, and we could talk another hour about hypocrisy with baseball and gambling and everything, but yeah, I mean, there's this part of me now that it's kind of like, now that he's gone, I kind of feel bad that he didn't get in, and I think it would have meant a lot to him, and more at the age of 83 than it probably, even like in 89. I mean, I think that as time passed, I think he maybe wouldn't have admitted it, but I think he did admit it. I mean, I think it would have meant a lot, and it would have been pretty amazing. So it's kind of unfortunate, and so I don't know it'll be interesting to see what they do. And Manfred has been very quiet.
I don't think we're recording this on Thursday evening after his passing. Manfred still hasn't spoken. Jack, I think what they ought to do, they ought to admit him. They should have admitted him years ago, I think, but just with an asterisk on his plaque in the Hall of Fame. Go through all of his accomplishments and clearly put at the bottom. He was permanently banned from baseball in 1989, and just go with it. And I think part of the reason I think MLB will admit him is that he no longer will be able to take advantage of his of his Hall of Fame membership. They were probably afraid he gets admitted into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And he's, going around the country signing autographs, etc. And he can't do that anymore. And, I think it's primarily for the fans.
He's got Hit King on the collar of his shirt. So, Hall of Fame on the collar of his shirt. Yeah, it might have been a little much. That's a great point. That I hadn't thought about that, but That might very well be.
They have to do it for the fans. You know, the good news is the Cincinnati Reds ownership, Bob Castellini, showed some grace and allowed him in the Reds Hall of Fame.
Right.
I don't know
And
why
put the
he didn't
number up
allow
and
him in the
retired the
Reds
number
broadcast
as well.
booth.
It should be. I mean, I think that's right. So
Yeah.
Anyway, well, we have
Murph, do you
droned
agree with
on
me?
here for nearly an hour, Randy, and I think maybe we'll give our listeners a break. They're probably tired of the sound of our voices, but boy, I tell you, this hour went really fast, and yeah, you know, what more can you say? We could talk about Pete for another 2 hours or more, and you're headed over to Champions on the West Side for a celebration of Pete's life. So you will be spending 2 or 3 hours talking about Pete yet tonight, right?
We will. Bill O'Connor and his posse are hosting the celebration of life. You know, Terry Finley, Dan Murphy, Tom Neff, Ron Major, Joe Chartolo, the whole crowd.
I love it. I love it. Well, tell him I said
Bobby
hi.
Jansen. Yeah. We can't let Bobby Jansen off the list. So anyway, yeah, Jack, this has been a lot of fun, and I think we let the studio audience tell us whether or not Pete belongs in the Hall of Fame.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Hey. All right.
That sounds like a yes to me, Randy.
Hustle in peace, Pete.
Hustle in peace. All right, man.
Oh, that's tremendous. Hustle in peace.
I love it. That's perfect, man.
The whole town's batting about Cincinnati. What a team, what a team, what a team. Each man and lady from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.